Bulletin presents The Diary, written and read by TF Ahmad. Cam wound his Fiat onto the gravel driveway, spraying small stones in all directions. He was thrown into alternating patterns of light and shade as he passed a copse of trees to his right. He pulled off his sunglasses, no longer needing them. The house appeared suddenly, and Cam had to slam on the brakes in order to miss colliding with the front door. "Shit," he said, slapping the steering wheel. He got out of the car and whistled. He had seen the house in pictures, but had no idea it would be this big. The house had started as a one-room Tudor-style cottage with a thatched roof. A hallway connected the back of the cottage to a more Georgian-looking structure that was 3 stories in height. Other additions splayed out like arteries, connected by covered bridges or ground-level tunnels. Some additions were single-story, and some were of 3 stories. A Victorian-style tower was tacked onto the southeast side of the complex. There seemed to be no rhyme or reason to the hodgepodge of styles, but accrued wealth and eccentricity were the only explanations Cam could think of. After making a lap around the house, he returned to his car, grabbed his suitcase, and approached the austere front door. Cam had inherited this house from his Uncle George. Though George had owned it for a better part of 25 years, it had remained unoccupied for at least 60. Cam had no idea why. It was a marvelous building. Uncle George had never married, and Cam was his only surviving relative. Both of Cam's parents were dead, the result of a massive train derailment 3 years ago. Cam had been in college then, reading comic books in his bed when he got the phone call from Uncle George. He still had trouble reading Captain America. Cam opened the padlock that secured the ancient front door with a key the estate agent had provided. Ashley, her name had been. She was quite the looker, too, and offered to show Cam around the property. He was about to take her up on her offer, but decided he wanted to experience this alone. There was a deep magnetism to the idea of owning a house outright after living in cheap apartments with more roommates than fingers on one hand. The interior of the house was darker than Cam expected. The cottage now acted as the foyer. Something the estate agent said triggered Cam's memory. "Make sure you buy candles," Ashley said earlier that day. "Candles?" Cam asked. Ashley nodded. "The place has never been wired for electricity." Cam groaned. "Are you serious?" "Yeah. You can get some at the store down the street from here. I'd buy maybe 50. Only light them in rooms you are in or rooms you are adjacent to. There are plenty of candle holders and wall sconces throughout the house. Oh, and don't get matches." "Why?" Ashley smiled. "You won't be able to reach into the sconces and light the candles. Get a long-stemmed lighter." Cam smiled back. "Of course." "Oh, and get a couple of flashlights and batteries. Lots and lots of batteries." Cam walked into the kitchen, where natural light poured in from a large row of windows on the east face of the building. Off the kitchen was a living room and first-floor bedroom. After exploring the rest of the house, Cam realized he could stay exclusively in the Georgian portion of the house. He was glad that Ashley had taken it upon herself to have the house cleaned by professionals. He hated the idea of walking into a dust trap. The thought of it made him gag. A feeling of unease slipped into Cam the first time he lost his way. The house was a labyrinth, and getting turned around was easy. The lack of electricity made the house oppressive and tight. At one point during his adventures, he found himself in the basement. He only realized this after he saw a strip of windows facing the front of the house. He could see the gravel driveway and the tires of his red Fiat. Cam looked at his watch. It was 3 p.m. "I should probably head to the grocery store." The sound of his own voice was heavy, and the sentence rang in his ears as he headed back up the stairs. Cam was whistling in the kitchen an hour later, plastic grocery bags strewn all over the countertops. He filled the icebox with a bag of ice purchased from the gas station and put his perishable goods away. He made a roast beef sandwich, piled a large portion of potato chips onto a plate, and carried his lunch into the living room with a 6-pack of beer. A few candles were already lit, and that brought to mind a predicament that many a modern man faced: what to do for entertainment. No electricity meant no TV, no radio, and no stereo. There has to be a library or something in here, he thought. There was a library, in a fashion. A narrow room adjacent to the kitchen was full of books piled haphazardly on ancient, undulating shelves. This might have been a pantry in a past life, but now served as the most cramped library in all of Illinois. It was too dark to read the titles of the books inside, so Cam lifted a candle and scanned the shelves. All of the books were old and faded, and Cam recalled that the house hadn't been occupied in 60 years. He grabbed a slim red volume off the shelf at random. It was old and had faded gold letters embossed on the front. "Diary," Cam read in the faint candlelight. He opened the book to the front cover. "Herein lies the diary of yours truly, Quentin K. If I am among the living, please do me a wonderful service and return this volume unread." Cam let out a sharp exhale. He knew that name. Though Quentin K was only distantly related to him, Cam had heard talk of his so-called Grandpa Q, not all of it very good. He tucked the book under his arm and made his way back to his meal. Part of him felt guilty for reading another man's personal thoughts and feelings, but Grandpa Q had been dead since 1920 and probably wouldn't mind someone reading his archaic musings. A profound excitement filled Cam as he returned to the living room. He found a comfortable space on the couch, catching a momentary glimpse out the window. He saw the large field next to the house, the fading light giving the grass a soft glow. The wind whistled and was followed by silence. He was alone out here. There wasn't even a phone in the house. Warmth spread through him, and he felt a sudden kinship to the past in that instant. No blaring radio, no sound of street traffic, only the sounds of nature and the turning of pages. This is how the men of old spent their time. This is how people in the past amused themselves, and their lives were still rich despite not having the nightly news and rock music. Cam sighed and opened the diary. September 5th, 1909. What a wonderful summer morning. Missy and I have at last placed our final touches on the arrangement of furniture in this, my late father's estate. Missy has been with child for the last few months, and the move has not been easy on her mood. The doctor informed us the previous week that we may be expecting twins. Though the idea of two screaming little things frightens us both, we know that we have the financial means to provide for them adequately. My inheritance will be more than enough for day-to-day expenses, and the occasional painting I sell will bring in a generous amount of savings. I feel our future in this house will rival those of mythic kings. September 10th, 1909. Missy has been assisting me in the placement of my paintings in both the house proper and my private studio in what we have christened the Squat Tower. This 4-story structure attached to the back of the estate like a long tooth looked ungainly at first, but the top level provides a great view of the surrounding countryside, and it is a good aid to my inspiration. Missy, despite her condition, has been a great help in playing judge to my whims. She has encouraged the placement of certain artworks in certain locations, and has vetoed the placement of some in other less desirable locations. Her perception in these matters is one of the great things I admire about her, and my excitement at our coming children grows with each passing day. I have made acquaintance with some of the local gentlemen in the town, including the local doctor who will be assisting in the birth of our twins. He's a cultured man who seems to be aware of many current events around the globe. His office is filled with books and periodicals not relevant to the medical profession, and I was pleased to see several volumes on art in his possession. I anticipate many great conversations with this man in the future. I invited him to dinner this Friday, and he obliged with a large smile. I think I shall like this little village very much. September 17th, 1909. Mr. Patrick Smith, the good town doctor, arrived for dinner this evening. He was a man with quite a dramatic flourish about him. He stood at almost 6 feet tall, and his deep auburn hair stuck out in massive curls from beneath his hat. He was dressed smartly in an evening suit and wore crisp white gloves despite the heat. Missy took his hat and coat and ushered him into the dining space. He stopped along the walls to admire some of my artwork and complimented me on my scumbling brushstrokes. I was surprised that he knew the technique, but he explained how he used to room with an eccentric painter while in medical school in New York. Dr. Smith enjoyed the dinner Missy served, though he did offer mock consternation at the exertion she was putting her body through whilst with child. Missy said she did not mind serving us, as we had never employed serving staff of our own. We considered ourselves quite modern, industrious people. We talked of current events that evening, with the doctor waxing philosophical about the recent advances in aviation made by Orville Wright. I nodded in agreement, for though I did not keep up with this topic, the doctor spoke with such authority that I had little reason to doubt his account of events. After our splendid meal, Dr. Smith and I retired to the lounge with glasses of bourbon. Missy left us alone to wash up and focus on a knitting project she had begun earlier that week in anticipation of our babies. "You've made quite the home for yourself, Mr. K," the doctor offered. "That is very kind of you to say," I replied. "Though I hesitate to call painting a business, I must treat it as such in order to ensure an income for my family." The doctor raised his glass. "And let us drink to the future happiness and prosperity of that family." We each took sips and settled into an easy rhythm. A few minutes later, after a short silence, the doctor's appearance turned grave, and he leaned in conspiratorially. "Mr. K, you are a man I admire a lot. You are intelligent, and your wife is lovely, but I wonder if I may speak freely for a second." Confused at this change in tone, I gestured for the man to continue. "Well, as you are well aware, your father was quite the fixture in this town." I nodded, though the hidden meaning in the doctor's words did not escape me. My father and I never got along after the death of my mother. He treated her terribly at the end of her life. She was stricken with a wasting disease that doctors could not diagnose. My father stepped out with other women quite often and quite openly, if the rare letters from my mother were to be believed. After my mother's death, Missy and I would visit this house quite often, but we were always received coldly, and we soon ceased our visits entirely. I do not want to sound ungrateful or harsh, but the death of my father put an end to a strain and anxiety I did not even know I had. The doctor continued. "According to some of his scant close friends, your father's mood and behavior began to change. Now, I know what you are thinking. The illness of a close loved one can affect men in many ways, but his friends insisted that this behavior was beyond anything they believed to be normal." Though I was not incensed that the doctor, a new acquaintance, spoke so openly about my father, I was starting to feel nervous. I had tried vainly to erase the memory of my cold father in his last miserable years. It was something I had not been successful in forgetting. "From whom are you hearing such rumors?" I asked. I do not recall their names, for they were not of my social circle, but there were precisely 3 men, all men of business, who sat at the Bowers Club every Thursday evening smoking cigars and talking loudly. I would take my assistant George Everson to the club that same night every week for a drink and some cards. I believe in engaging with my work companions socially to build positive relationships. The doctor sat up straight at this last statement, as if he were declaring a campaign slogan atop a podium. I gestured for the man to continue. "They were saying that your father was seeing things around the house." "Seeing things?" I asked. "What kinds of things?" "I am not sure. Whatever it was, they said it terrified your father so much that he began to look for any excuse to leave this house." I sat in silence for some time, absorbing this information. It seemed so bizarre that I could not think of a response. I decided to leave it alone. The doctor left late in the evening. Missy is already in bed. I will join her shortly. Cam skipped the next few entries, finding them tedious and clinical. Though he had never seen any of his grandfather's paintings, he was reasonably certain that his painting skills outshined his writing. He continued reading several pages later. December 25th, 1909. Missy and I are still tired from the preparations we made the night before. Our breakfast was eaten in silence. Missy complained of stomach pains all afternoon as we went into the town to see the festivities. Lights danced across the gray, gloomy landscape, and the main square was full to the brim with people dressed in the heavy cloth of winter. Missy and I sat in a cafe to rest her tired feet and aching belly. I kept my eye out for the doctor, though my wife attempted to soothe me. Surely the doctor would not want to be bothered with medical questions on this day, she said, patting my hand with her gentle gloved hand. But you are in pain, my dear, I countered. Pain is my frequent companion, Quentin. When she said my name thusly, my nerves calmed immediately. It was in moments like this when my great admiration for Missy increased a dozenfold. I sighed, grabbing her small hand in both of mine. Dear, I said, it must be a sign that our child is coming soon. He is so eager to enter this wind-swept world that he begs with his fists and feet to be let loose. Oh, my husband, ever the poet. But don't forget, we may have a daughter. Or twins, like the doctor predicted. She laughed. Then we may have one child of each stripe. One for you, and one for me. 2 for both of us. I smile as I write these words, for the fresh memory continues to bring me joy. We happened upon the doctor later that evening. He was walking with his wife and child, a boy of about 15. They were dressed very smartly, and as they ambled down the square, I had the sudden desire to yell, "Stop!" and paint them as they stood. Maybe I was envious. Who could guess? My, the doctor said as he approached us. You are both looking well. Is that a medical diagnosis, Mr. Smith? My wife asked. The doctor laughed. Why, yes it is, he said jovially. His wife and son smiled with a little embarrassment as my wife and the doctor joked, and we soon settled into easy conversation. Dr. Smith's wife, Pamela, is a plump woman, though she wears this heaviness evenly, giving her a strong physique. Their son Edward is the polar opposite, rail thin with almost no muscle. He was a quiet boy, but that I attributed to the lack of boys his age in the immediate vicinity. After suffering us in silence for a half hour, Dr. Smith sent his son off to get himself some sweets. We passed the evening in pleasant conversation, the ladies speaking of their matters while the doctor and I spoke of the concerns of men. At evening's end, Missy pulled the doctor aside for 2 minutes, and they spoke in hushed tones. On the drive back home, I inquired about my wife's conversation with the doctor. He told me to come by his office as soon as possible, she said. And why the urgency? I asked, alarmed. Missy shrugged, but did not answer. We completed our journey in awkward silence. We went to bed soon after. January 8th, 1910. I am afraid. There, I have written these words on paper, and now they are out of my body and out of my mind. Missy's appointment brought news we were both anticipating and fearing. Dr. Patrick Smith confirmed that Missy is having twins, but he also noted with some concern that Missy's stomach pains were not normal. He seemed optimistic, though, and prescribed an analgesic to ease the pain. During dinner that night, a downcast and melancholy Missy asked me a peculiar question. Quentin, have you been having any dreams? This question so threw me that I did not know how to respond. I stared up at her and, noting her expression, probed my mind for an answer. Well, to be honest, I can't quite remember if I dreamt recently or not. I don't mean recently, she said, acid in her tone. Then what do you mean? She took her time answering. I don't know. It is only that I have been having dreams, dreadful dreams, since we moved into this house. She looked up at me then, daring me to say something against her. I did not. I sat still, letting my plate grow cold. At first, it was nothing particular I dreamt about. I would wake up with a pitiful dread and no recollection of what had transpired. As the days went on, however, more details of these nightmares began to emerge. I would find myself out in the field outside of our house, looking off in the distance. Before me a marvelous light would emerge, followed by a sound like the pop of a small toy handgun. I would round the hill next to the field and see a massive spiral staircase ascending up to the heavens, glowing with an unseen light. I would approach the staircase and place my foot on the first step. This is as far as I got before waking up. I know the dream seems harmless, if a bit bizarre, but I always woke up with fear throughout my body, and I always noticed your supine body lying fast asleep, oblivious to my pain. My hands began to quiver, and guilt burned my midsection. Every night I had this dream. Sometimes the fear was only acute, other times it was intense. But every time I'd only stop on the first stair. It was only last week that I began to climb higher. "Did you see where this staircase led?" I asked, hoping to show sympathy and understanding. "No," Missy said quietly. "I would be staring at my feet, walking slowly and purposefully. The stairs appeared to be made of glass, though I could not see through them to the other side. I could see no structure holding the staircase aloft, nor could I see any destination. I would awake with the same fear, only this time I started having stomach pains." At these words, the flames on the candles before us swayed in an unfelt wind, and I looked around our dim dining room, half expecting someone to walk out of the shadows. "The higher I climbed," she continued, "the sharper the pain I would feel in my stomach. I'm not sure if the dream was causing the pain, or if my pain was causing the dream." She chuckled. "I dare say I am not one for psychology." "Do you have any idea what it is that you fear in these dreams?" She looked at me in the eyes then, her stare unwavering and frightful. "That's just it," she said, her voice wavering. "I don't know what it is that frightens me. I just feel scared, and every day I feel like something is coming. I feel as if we are on a runaway train, heading straight for the edge of a cliff. I do not know when we will careen over the edge, but I know it will be soon." Missy began to sob. I rose from my chair and knelt before my wife, grasping her hands and speaking words of comfort. But she was inconsolable. I led her to bed, leaving a full table behind. She was asleep within minutes, and I sat by her side for an hour, thinking she would wake with a wail of fright. After I was sure she was sleeping soundly, I made my way to my studio. I'm not sure why, but I suddenly felt the need to paint. My studio is located at the top of the squat tower. It is a square, high-ceilinged space. A number of canvases, both finished and half-finished, lean haphazardly against the wall. Jars of paint sit on old wooden tables, and rags of every shade litter the floor. There is a large window centered on each wall, allowing views of the surrounding country. My easel is set up in the exact center of the room, and I can turn it based on which window I want to look out at the moment. There was a half-finished canvas leaning against the easel. I had been struck with inspiration earlier that week, grabbing a broad brush and sweeping a pale blue sky on the upper half of the canvas. As I looked at my attempt at art, I could not remember what I had been trying to accomplish. All I saw was a puddle of color, a child's scrawl. I wrinkled my nose as I removed my jacket. I donned my smock and rolled the sleeves of my shirt up to the elbow. I grabbed my brush, surprised at my own impatience. I mixed some blue with some black, tinting it with some white. I took the gray-blue color and swept my brush across the top of the canvas, working my way down. I placed that brush in some stagnant gray water and picked up another brush. I created a rough green foreground before grabbing a finer brush and working in the center of the canvas. I did not think, nor did I care where my brush struck. I was wild with a strange urgency. I am unsure what prompted this, but my best guess was my anxiety at my wife's condition. She had thoroughly frightened me. It was not so much her words as it was her demeanor. She had been short with me, and had talked of premonitions of doom. I always knew her to be a woman of strong character, one who had more gumption than even my most stalwart male friends. Nothing seemed to scare Missy, not even the prospect of having to raise 2 children instead of 1. Yes, we were comfortable financially, but could we actually raise a family? My doubt made me angry. I began to paint with more ferocity. I slashed at the canvas with my spatula. I smeared paint with my fingers to create shadow. I mixed and remixed my paints, creating a phantasmagoria of strange and ridiculous colors. I cared not for composition. I cared not for the final product. All I cared about was abusing my canvas. At last, after 2 hours of strenuous activity, I dropped my palette onto the nearest table and stepped back from my work. I was panting, the sweat matting my hair to my forehead. I ineffectually wiped at my brow with the back of my hand and blinked several times to clear my head. Then I looked at my canvas. What I saw made my breath catch. The ground was more brown than green, as if I'd painted a dead and decaying earth. The trees I'd placed in this field were skeletal and starving, their pointy branches rising towards the sky like gnarled arthritic fingers. The sky was a stormy gray, and I thought I could see a faint trace of lightning. What frightened me the most, however, was the gleaming spiral staircase I painted in the center. It started at the dead ground and ascended up into the clouds, disappearing into the unknown. What had I done? How had I done it? I was snapped out of my reverie by the sound of a thunderclap. I shook my head, grabbed the nearest sheet I could find, and threw it over the still wet canvas. I need to go to bed now. My eyes grow heavy and my hand unsteady at this late hour. Cam looked up from the diary and eyed the candle on the other side of the slowly darkening room. The flame danced, and it seemed sinister somehow, like it was laughing at him. He wasn't sure what he had just read. He wasn't frightened or anything, but he certainly didn't feel at ease. Cam got up and lit a few candles before heading into the kitchen. He grabbed the bag of potato chips and popped open another beer. He sat down again on the couch and reached for the diary. His hand froze halfway to the book. He suddenly remembered why he had felt so uneasy. His Uncle George, who had owned this house for the last 25 years, had inherited it from his father Richard, who had passed away in 1955. Richard had owned it since 1920, when he was just 19 years old. Richard had been a distant cousin of Quentin, and had only received the house because Quentin had no next of kin. He had no wife, and he had no children. Was he going to read about the last days of Missy? Was he going to encounter some horrible tragedy written by a broken man in these moldy pages? Cam's uneasiness turned to a strange embarrassment. He felt he could not read on. This wasn't some entertaining novel, some penny dreadful full of ghouls and monsters and madness. This was a clinical account of reality as experienced by his own flesh and blood. However, Cam's hovering hand began to shake, and before he could hesitate any longer, he reached forward and grabbed the diary. January 24th, 1910. I have been treading lightly around my Missy lately. She's been short of temper, finding fault with every action I commit. The doctor has said that such behavior is normal for a pregnant woman, but it began so suddenly after she confessed of her strange dreams that I hesitate to ascribe blame to her maternal condition. Taken to eating a light breakfast before she awakes and retiring to my studio for most of the morning. She often sets my lunch on the table outside my studio and doesn't call me back down to the parlor until it is time for tea. Though we are American, Missy adores the gastronomic habits of the English. In the last couple of weeks, I've been unable to shake the image of my horrible painting from my mind. The morning after I painted it, I wrapped it tightly in the sheet that was already covering it and set it behind some mediocre half-finished canvases in one corner of the room. I tried my best to paint works of a more pleasant and vibrant nature, favoring blues and greens and yellows over browns and reds and grays. Now, I am not your typical landscape painter. I do not bring with me an easel, canvas, and paints to a rocky outcropping to paint the sunset. I usually sketch on long walks and use these as inspiration to create my own original landscapes inspired by the nature around me. I was working on a series of rolling green hills on a long horizontal canvas when I heard the distinct sound of Missy screaming. My paintbrush streaked across the canvas, creating an ugly green streak across what was supposed to be my sky, but I hardly cared. I threw my palette and brush down and ran out of my studio, my artist's smock still on. I raced down the stairs and found my wife sitting in a chair in the parlor, her face in her hands. She was steadily rocking back and forth and sobbing. I ran to her side and kneeled before her, my hands gently moving hers away from her face. Her visage was twisted. I had never seen her look as such before. I made to say something, but my lips quivered. We sat there like that, a strange tableau, for a few minutes. There was no sound I could remember hearing. Finally, Missy's breathing became more even. It seemed she was gathering strength to speak, so I gave her time. Finally, she spoke. "I saw them," she said. Her face appeared much calmer now, but her eyes were hard, her mouth set in a line. She looked determined. "Saw who?" I asked. "I saw—" She hesitated, as if there was something blocking her ability to speak. "I saw our girls." I lifted one eyebrow in confusion, but Missy wasn't looking at me. Regardless, she seemed to know my reaction. "I know how it sounds," she continued, "but you have to believe me. I saw 2 twin girls outside the window in the field. They were wearing white dresses, like the ones my sisters and I used to wear. They were holding hands. My eyes met theirs, and I just knew they were our girls." She placed a hand on her belly and looked up at me. "You do believe me, right?" I said nothing. What does one say when his wife screams in terror at bizarre delusions? "What were they doing?" I finally asked. "They were staring at me," she said. "Staring at you?" "Yes." I got up to stare out the window of the parlor. There was nothing out there, of course. All I saw was the field adjacent to our house. It stretched to the horizon. A small set of trees lay thinly to the north, blocking the landscape beyond. Rolling hills obscured any adjacent houses to the south. I had seen this landscape countless times, but I never felt the need to paint it. It did not interest me at all. It was just a field. "Where did they go?" I asked, not necessarily to Missy. "I don't know," she said. "I looked away. I remember screaming. I'm sorry." Her sobs were low and muted. I let her cry. It was best for her to get it out. I retreated without a word and returned my smock to its proper place in my studio. I made straight for my liquor cabinet. I downed a glass of whiskey so fast I coughed. I find I have been doing that a lot lately. February 2nd, 1910. I hesitate to write here at all today, but I feel I must. The events of the previous weeks seem silly by comparison to the tragedy that has since befallen us. I will do my best to explain. At approximately 11 this morning, I was in my studio. The day was cloudy, and rain seemed to be on the horizon. I was working on a brand new canvas, almost completely bare of paint. As I was reaching for a new brush, I heard the sound of Missy coming up the stairs. She was likely carrying my lunch for the day on a small silver tray. I was softening some rookwood brown with white when I heard a gasp followed by the clatter of metal and ceramic on the floor. I immediately stopped what I was doing and called out into the hallway. "Missy?" I heard nothing. I removed my smock and approached the door. "Is everything all right?" Still nothing. I opened the door to my studio and gazed into the hallway. About the floor lay broken dishes, piles of food, and the smell of ale. Amid this pile was Missy, collapsed on the floor. As I got closer, I noticed a spreading deep red stain on the front of her dress. It took me barely a second to realize my love was in danger. "Missy!" I cried, and knelt at her side. She was completely unconscious, unable to move at my loudest cries. I stood up and ran to Missy's armoire, grabbing a large shawl to wrap her in. I also grabbed a blanket and swaddled her like a child. I took her down to the car and drove in a much-needed haste. We arrived a half-hour later at the hospital, where Missy was ushered away from me and I was made to wait in the dingy space by a drafty window. Hours later, I was disturbed from an uneasy slumber by a solemn doctor who informed me of the news. Missy had had an ectopic pregnancy, an extreme rarity according to the doctor. They were able to stabilize her, but neither of the twins made it. The doctor said it was quite uncommon for symptoms to show up this late in a pregnancy. Usually, the symptoms occurred much sooner, manifesting before the woman started to show the pregnancy severely. I absorbed this medical lesson with a detached attention. My twin girls, both dead. No chance at being the father I was promised to be. No pitter-patter of small feet running across the house, pestering their good-natured mother. The doctor finished his soliloquy, and I was led into Missy's room. She was asleep. The day must have drained me too, for I fell asleep in my chair. I dreamt of the staircase that day for the first time. I found myself on the lawn just outside the house. The grass was dead and decayed in front of me. This arid path snaked past the edge of our property and wound around the hill. At the edge of this hill, a bright white light emerged. It was not the sun, I'm sure of that. This light wasn't just visible with the naked eye. It seemed to seep into your skull like a sheet soaking up water. As soon as I wound around the hill, I saw the gleaming spiral staircase before me, winding up into the unknown geography of the clouds. I attempted to shield my eyes from the light, but I was unsuccessful. The light was still in my head. Through the space between my fingers, I could make out 3 distinct figures, one taller than the other 2. Before I could make out their faces, I was gently awakened by my wife's hand nudging my arm. We did not speak for a while, but simply sat in each other's presence. When we finally did speak, we had little to say. "I'm so sorry, Missy," I said. "I know," she said. "Me too." They had suggested to Missy that she stay the night at the hospital, but she refused. After clearing our business with the doctor, we drove home in silence. Missy has been asleep for the last couple of hours. I think I will join her now. February 5th, 1910. I was looking out of the parlor window this morning and noticed something strange. We have had a cold yet relatively mild winter this year, and you could often see little green and brown patches of grass peeking through the dust of snow on the ground. This morning, however, there was a patch of grass that was totally dead and brown. It seemed to form a marked path moving away from my house. I closed the shutters for the rest of the day. February 11th, 1910. Missy told me this afternoon that she has still been having visions out in the field. We were drinking tea in the parlor, the shutters closed tight against the sun. The room was gray, dust mites dancing in the faint patches of light that slipped through the shutters. I listened to her monologue with all the patience I could muster. "They're staring at me harder this time," she said. She was, of course, speaking of our dead twin daughters, the ones who hadn't even had a chance to draw breath. She stared at the closed shutters and continued. "This time, instead of cowering in fear, I followed them outside. They waited for me. This was the first time I'd seen them up close. They had your eyes, Quentin, big and blue and curious. They didn't say anything to me. They turned around, still holding hands, and began to walk down the path." "The path?" I interrupted. In the confusing maze of her speech, this is what caught me off guard. "Yes," she said, a little impatiently. "The dead grass has formed a path around the hill. I followed our girls down this path and saw the gleaming staircase when I rounded the hill. It was just like in my dreams, only now it was real. The light was so bright it hurt my head. I could barely see through it, but I distinctly saw them walking up the staircase, easy as you please. Their hands remained entwined, and the sight of this made my heart break. I desperately wanted to follow them up the staircase, Quentin. It was a desire so strong I thought I would bolt forward at any moment. It felt like I was on a sinking vessel, and all I needed to do was to make one frightful leap towards a lifeboat. But something held me back. Was it fear? I'm not sure. I turned around and came back to the house, tears clouding my eyes and shame burning up my back. I had had enough. I downed the rest of my tea and slammed it into the saucer. Cup and saucer both cracked and crumbled, spreading pieces both large and small across the table. Missy gasped, almost dropping her tea into her lap. She had turned away from the closed shutters and was now gazing at me with the look of a frightened deer. I took a deep breath, not removing my hand from my broken cup, and spoke. "Missy, my dear, you know I love you dearly, but I am beginning to grow tired of this talk of visions." Missy did not speak, just stared at me with those wide eyes. "What we have suffered through, what you suffered through, was an immense tragedy. I myself have trouble dealing with it every day. I cannot imagine your suffering. But all of this talk of staircases and fantastic light and ghostly girls is frankly too much for me to handle. I do not think it is healthy to indulge in these delusions." My last word was like a key that unlocked my wife. Her gaze went from surprised to hard and challenging. She took a careful sip of her tea and neatly placed it on the table before her. Her calm manner frightened me almost more than her glare. "What I am seeing are not delusions," she said evenly. "I see our twin girls out there almost daily. I do not know what they are, be they ghosts or demons or tricksters, but I know what I see, and I know what I feel. I know they are calling to me, asking me to join them. I feel I shall very soon." I fought through my fright to speak, adding as much genuine concern as I could. "Be that as it may, I still feel it is unhealthy. Please, let me take you to Dr. Smith or some other physician. Or, forget the doctor. Let us board a train to Chicago or Indianapolis. We can visit your aunt, stay in her extra rooms. We can be among people again, walking down busy streets with the sounds of the city in our ears. Please, let's leave this house." "I cannot leave," Missy said simply, her stoic demeanor crumbling. "I have to be here with them. I must be able to see them whenever they choose to show themselves to me." "But they are not here," I countered. I had tried anger, I had tried fear, and I had tried concern. Maybe cold rationality would work. "They were never here, Missy. They are dead, they are buried, and they are now with God. No good can come of us remaining here any longer." Missy said nothing, and I realized I had the upper hand. She was about to give in. However, I was surprised to see her spring up from her chair and walk to the window. She undid the latch and threw the shutters open. The room brightened immediately, and I squinted against the sudden assault of light. "Look out there," she said. "Look out there, Quentin, and tell me you see nothing." I did not get up from my chair. I made a concerted effort not to look out the window. I would not give in to her fantasies. I would not humor her any longer. "They are out there, Quentin. I can feel them. They are close." "There is nothing out there," I thought. "There is nothing out there." I stood up and walked towards the window. Instead of gazing outside, however, I grabbed the shutters and swung them shut violently, the clatter of wood scattering around the entire house like fleeing roaches. I threw the latch and plunged the room into dimness once more. Missy was staring up at me, her eyes filled with tears. These, I saw, were not tears of sorrow or tears of rage. They were tears of despair. Without uttering a word, Missy ran past me and up the stairs to our bedroom. I heard the door slam. I took one look at the closed shutters and followed her. I would have to apologize and comfort her as well as I could. "There is nothing out there," I said to myself on my way out of the parlor. "There is nothing out there." It is late, and I am writing this with the ineffectual aid of one flickering candle. I was awakened by a particularly frightful dream. It is never how one reads in novels. I did not scream and spring out of bed. I did not sweat through the sheets. I did not even move. My eyes simply opened, my body rigid with terror. The room was dark, and no moonlight entered through the bedroom window. I remained where I was, staring straight ahead at the wall before me. I could not remember what the dream had been about, nor could I remember what had triggered the sudden and total fright. The dream could have been of the staircase again, though I am not sure. Something had happened, and it had been terrifying enough to wake me up. If only I could remember what it was. February 27th, 1910. I haven't had time to write here recently. I have been painting. My hands seem to move of their own accord, mixing paints and attacking canvases with a strange mania. I barely remember completing any of these paintings, but when I am done, I stand before monstrous scenes with sweat coating my back and dripping from my forehead. I do not know what I have painted until I am done. Each scene is different, but there are themes running through every canvas. I've painted a dead forest with trees blacker than night. I've painted the gleaming staircase covered in flames, their red and orange hues seeming to pulse with an unknown beat. I've even painted a pair of twin girls wearing white dresses and holding hands. This last painting would have been frightening enough on its own, but it was their faces that gave me the most fright of all. In fact, you could say that they did not have faces, for I had covered their bodies with a thick layer of red paint. Blood coated their faces and their dresses, pooling at the ground around their feet. I kept all of these canvases away from Missy. I grabbed sheets from around my studio and wrapped these paintings as I wrapped my first one of the staircase. The paint was often still wet, but I did not care. I have stacked them haphazardly around the studio, praying Missy never finds a reason to enter this room. March 8th, 1910. I was thinking of my father again this morning. I would like to say this was a random thought, one that drifted into my brain like a leaf through an open doorway, but this is not entirely true. I was remembering what my esteemed friend Dr. Patrick Smith told me about my father's last days in this house. He had said my father was seeing things so frightening that he would flee the house by any means he could. What he had seen, I never knew. I never asked him any personal questions while he was alive, and tried my hardest to keep my contact with him as short as possible. Now I wonder if I should have asked him about his pain, asked him how he was coping with the death of my mother. Maybe I could have prepared myself for what happened. Last night I awoke to find Missy absent from bed. I do not know what woke me up, but I had a vague sense that I had been dreaming again. I called Missy's name feebly in the dark room, not able to see into all of the dark corners. I sat up and listened, hoping to catch the sound of Missy treading down the stairs or rustling in the kitchen. I heard nothing. I stood up and donned my robe and slippers. My eyes felt heavy, like I had only been asleep for a few minutes, but I quickly ascertained that it was 2 o'clock in the morning. I walked out of the bedroom into the window at the end of the hall. The moonlight was strong here, and I wanted to at least be able to see my hand in front of my face. When I approached the window, however, I was met with a very peculiar sight. The grass still lay dead outside the house, creating its characteristic winding path. What surprised me is how clear the path was in the night. I looked up at the sky and saw the moon giving off a dim glow, partially obscured by rolling clouds. It was then I realized that the light illuminating my lawn was not from the moon. The light was coming from around the hill. I turned and walked down the stairs and out the front door, not bothering to grab a lantern. The strange light entered me again when I rounded the hill, causing a strange fatigue and pain. I saw the staircase from my dream, illuminated by an unknown source and spiraling up into the sky. I also saw the 3 figures again, one tall, the other 2 shorter. This time, I could see them clearly through the light. Missy stood with her back to me, staring at 2 twin girls holding hands. I cannot explain this, but at the sight of these 2 girls, my heart swelled with love. I would do anything for these 2 strangers. Their brown hair was wavy, their hairstyles identical. They wore the same long white nightgown. Neither their hair nor their gowns moved in the wind, as if they were statues. I tried to scream Missy's name. I tried to scream for the girls, but nothing escaped my throat. Every time I opened my mouth, a current of freezing air rushed in, making any attempt at speech painful. The girls were facing Missy, their backs to the gleaming staircase. Their eyes shifted towards me, and their gaze was soft and appealing, almost beckoning. I began to slowly walk forward. As soon as I moved, the girls turned and ascended the staircase. Their steps were sure and mechanical, like they were performing as automatons in some bizarre play. As soon as they were out of sight, Missy began to follow. I attempted to quicken my pace, but I seemed to be gliding through molasses. Missy ascended the staircase much in the same way the girls had. With each step they took, the longing in my heart grew tenfold. My chest ached with the desire to join them on this journey, to ascend into this great unknown. It did not matter where the staircase led. It did not matter if it led into the Garden of Eden or to the depths of a fiery prison. I just know I wanted to be with Missy and those girls. My girls. My pace was glacial. By the time I reached the foot of the stairs, the light was so intense that I had to shut my eyes. Still, the light pulsed in my brain and pushed against the inside of my skull. I put one foot gingerly on the first tread. As soon as my foot made contact with the step, my brain was assaulted with visions. I saw the staircase flickering in the night. I saw my girls covered in blood, their faces a mass of ruined meat. I saw Missy falling from the sky, her body twisting at chaotic angles and her clothing whipping in the breeze like a flag. All of these visions were quick, like one of those moving pictures, but sped up to a sickening degree. I saw the sky rain black tar. I saw my home ablaze with a strange green fire. I saw bodies littering the field outside my house from the hill to the horizon. It did not stop. I felt it would continue until I grew old and rotted where I stood. But it did eventually stop. The vision ceased abruptly and I opened my eyes wide, not knowing what I would see. What I saw was nothing. I was standing in an empty field, the hills and my house behind me, the edge of the forest close by. I rubbed my aching head with my hands and said a short and stern prayer. When I felt I was back in control of myself, I searched the area as far as I dared, calling out for Missy until my voice grew hoarse. My panic increased with each passing minute, and I soon found myself running to the nearest house, an austere cabin about 1.5 miles away. I banged on the door until a kind, middle-aged man answered. I explained as best I could about my predicament. I did not mention the stairs, I did not mention the 2 girls, and I did not mention my frightening visions. I simply said my wife was missing, and I needed help. The police were summoned, and I was questioned extensively about the evening's events. I repeated my story exactly as I had told it to my distant neighbor, making sure to avoid any mention of unnatural phenomena. The police were aware that Missy and I had recently lost our twin girls to a difficult pregnancy and that she had been melancholic the last few weeks. The police searched the area but were unable to ascertain her whereabouts. I was told that it was only a matter of time before she was found. It was hard to keep the disbelief off my face. April 19th, 1910. No sign of Missy. The police found her nightgown hanging from a tree about 500 feet into the woods. It was torn to ribbons and covered in dirt. They came up with this bizarre theory that Missy's depression concerning our stillborn children caused her to wander into the woods in a daze, where she eventually succumbed to the elements. I know this is not the truth, but hesitate to correct the officers of the law. June 30th, 1910. Still no news. I continue to keep vigil at the house, hoping against all logic that she will walk through the front door. September 12th, 1910. The weather has passed from cold to hot and is now transitioning into a mild chill. I still have no answers. I've been seeing the staircase regularly. I'll wake up from a nightmare and drift outside in my nightclothes, gazing at the gleaming tower and hoping Missy will walk down and greet me with open arms. Every time I see the staircase, the strange desire to climb it comes back with full force. I would be lying if I said I never thought about ascending. But those frightening visions I experienced the last time I tried to climb the stairs still haunt me day and night. I can scarcely close my eyes before the sight of Missy tumbling from the sky enters my mind. March 11th, 1911. It has been over a year since Missy's disappearance, and I am no closer to knowing the truth. I still live at this accursed house, painting canvas after canvas depicting the horrors in my head. I still wrap these paintings in sheets, hoping this action will also hide them from my dreams. I have decided that when I die, I will leave this house to whomever has the legal right to it. I do not know who in my family rightfully deserves this house. Maybe nobody does. There is something evil here in this land. Something that lured my Missy away and refuses to give her back to me. I will do what I can to resist the pull of the staircase. I will wait here until the end of my days, instructing whoever comes into ownership of this house to please refrain from selling it to some ignorant family. Do not subject any unknowing party to the evil that rests here. Hold on to the house, let it remain unoccupied, and keep it away from the world by any means necessary. The diary ended there. Cam closed the book and held it tightly in his hands. His nerves were taut, his eyes darting at the dim shadows cast by the scattered candles. He was unsure how to interpret what he had just read. It was written with such earnestness that he had trouble convincing himself it was a joke. He turned the book over in his hands. It was old, tattered, and worn. The handwriting was faded yet still legible. It wasn't a novel, and Cam could think of no reason why somebody would write a hoax diary and place it in an empty, unoccupied house. He shivered. Suddenly the house felt too dark, the shadows too numerous, the distance to the next house too far. "This is bullshit," Cam said, throwing the diary onto the table and standing up. He exited the room and bounded up the stairs, clutching a candelabrum with 6 lit candles. Quentin had mentioned that his artist's studio was in the squat tower, the highest room in the house. Cam knew exactly where this room was. At the top of the stairs was a short hallway with a dark brown door at the end. Cam held up the candelabrum like a character in a Gothic novel and strode forward. The light danced off the dusty walls and the floor creaked as he walked forward. The door was unlocked. Cam walked into the disused studio and saw that it still had an easel in the center of the room and a pitted wooden table full of dried tubes of paint. Canvases littered the room, stacked in corners and leaning against the walls haphazardly. Cam approached one stack of canvases and held the light up to them, careful not to light the entire room on fire. The canvas showed a rather pleasant landscape painted in greens and blues and yellows. Cam nudged that painting aside, only to find a similarly pleasant scene behind it. He began pushing canvases aside until he found what he was looking for, a painting wrapped tightly in a sheet. Cam grabbed it and placed it on the table. He knocked aside the tubes of paint and various other detritus off the table with barely a thought. The painting wasn't tightly wrapped, but part of the sheet stuck to the canvas, as if it had been wrapped up while the paint was still wet. He peeled the sheet off with a firm tug and tossed it aside. The painting showed a field with its grass dead and brown. In the middle of the painting was a bright white and blue gleaming staircase ascending off the top of the canvas. On the first step stood 3 figures painted in black silhouette. One was tall, the other 2 were shorter. Cam did a circuit of the room and grabbed a few more canvases and unwrapped them. Some of the paintings showed the twin girls as Quentin had described them, their dresses white and their faces covered in blood. Other paintings showed hellish landscapes with strange creatures and bizarre flora and fauna. The one thread between all of the paintings was that the staircase was always present. Cam grabbed the candelabrum and left the room, shutting the door firmly behind him. He took a deep breath and placed the candelabrum on the floor. The diary on its own would have been enough, but add the sprawling empty house with no electricity and the strange paintings covered up by a madman 60 years dead, and the situation went from simply frightening to downright bizarre. The light from the candelabrum swayed and went out. Cam was plunged into darkness. "Fuck this," he said, and tore down the stairs. The only light coming in through the windows was moonlight, but it was enough to see by. Cam stopped in the bedroom and grabbed his bag, making sure he had his car keys. He slipped on his shoes and walked out of the house, not bothering to lock the door. This is when he saw the light coming from around the hill. "It can't be," Cam said, abandoning his bag next to his half-open car door. He made his way around the house and down the field towards the hill. The grass below his feet was dead and decayed. The dirt crunched beneath his feet as he walked. The further he went, the stronger the light grew. It began to enter his head, causing a pounding headache. He shielded his eyes, trying to see between the slits of his fingers. Through the blanket of light, Cam could see a gleaming spiral staircase before him. There were 3 figures in silhouette walking up the stairs. He couldn't make out their faces, but knew instantly he was looking at Missy and her 2 twin daughters. A compulsion to follow them overtook him. He stepped towards the beacon before him, his head throbbing but his mind utterly blank. He approached the staircase and put his foot down on the first step. Some say Cam wandered into the woods and was lost. Still others claim that he was met with foul play, as his bag was found in the driveway and his car door open. Regardless, the 1980 disappearance of Cam Warden Brown remains unsolved to this day. That was The Diary. Please rate, review, subscribe, and tell a friend about this podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Night Bulletin.